you know. But the flip side of that is, if you really look at things over the last year and a half, coming up on 2 years, I've become less vocal about that, because there's also the whole question of people having the right to do with whatever they want with things they created, which was something that I didn't always feel was afforded me, and I used to defend on my own part. So they want to do something that doesn't appeal to me at all, with something that I think used to mean something else, or at least used to have a different impact. That's fine. There are far greater moral offenses in the world. It's just the thing where we can't identify with each other and where our motivations have drifted apart.
You know, going back to the modern day thing, did that sort of
modern day was so Saint Simon and Jude was one version of it, right?
Right.
By modern day, I was 6'1" and had come into my own body and had started to investigate things. And the first ripple I made at modern day was as a sophomore. I beat the hell out of the captain of senior ROTC. So not healthy, not good, but the exact opposite of the years that preceded it. And that was the first evidence, I think, of a lifelong manifestation of pushing back maybe a little too hard on people who would hurt or alienate or intimidate other people.
Do you remember, this is an odd question, but since we're going, do you remember after doing that having any remorse about having hurt that person?
Yeah, I got a hold of him later in the same day, and I said, so everybody's making fun of him before he got beat up by a sophomore. And I'd go walking from class to class in the hallways, and these idiots would start chanting Rocky. And I saw him in the hallway later in the day, and I grabbed him. I said, dude, I got lucky. I caught you coming down the steps, man. Any other time you would have kicked my ass into it. Could have been further from what's true, but I needed to try to put the guy back together a little bit. There have been bar fights where the effect was more severe than I wanted, and I ended up being the guy who gathers the other guy up. And, are you all right, man? Let me get you a ride home, blah, blah, blah.
Well, that reminds me of
even talking about these stories, it's impossible not to accuse a person telling these stories of braggadocio, and there's every chance there's a little bit of truth in that. At the same time, you can't lay the land out different than it fell. What's happened's happened.
It also kind of reminds me of those parts, like in the Bukowski stories, where he is outside of a bar and creates a big scene and causes a big mess and a ruckus, and then after, as it's just starting to settle down, he starts cleaning up, kind of in the middle of it. Yeah. That always reminded me of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Did any of that time at those schools play into Our Father and play into what you were coming?
No, Our Father's about modern day.
Gotcha.
It's about the Catholic Church. But it's funny because I think it almost applies more to Protestantism now and the infusion of supposedly Judeo-Christian values into Republican politics now. So it was, a bunch of Kennedy Democrats, pounding Catholic guilt into me in the 80s translates nicely to a bunch of Jesus freaks who think, people are drinking baby blood.
Right. That was good. It was good. Nice connection. With carnal knowledge, the question that I wrote here is, what question are you asking in that song? Or are you asking a question? Because I love that song. But it's...
Well, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, everybody at that point in life in particular seemed to me obviously to be craving connection.
This is early 90s, your early 20s?
Yeah. And those are the years where you first start experiencing, adolescent and post-adolescent heartbreak. It's a slightly different animal than when a girl throws mud at you in 8th grade, or 6th grade. So there was the attempted connection on that level, and there was just this. There were starting to be larger and larger tribes in underground music. I mean, they flat out looked differently, even within subgenres. And that was just a song that was just like, could we all stop acting like we've got our shit together and stop presenting this front of let's see, let's all hail the disconnection, howling or smiling though we crave affection. Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward thing, just about stop pretending to be one way. Stop dancing like you're shining when you're really bleeding out.
Gotcha.
And it was just more and more about let's admit to hurt. Now, that's very sensitive boy, dated, sort of early cusp of emo in some people's minds. But there's a whole culture now who would say that the opposite of that, of the kind of music I was pushing back at, is what defines, is the very definition of toxic masculinity.
Is there anything about the show that you guys played at the Palladium that you would do differently, or that you wish you would have done differently? I always wondered that, just because that was such a big show. You probably had so much on your mind, and maybe so many things you wanted to do. I always wondered about that.
No, I was really proud of that show. And I thought we played it well. 411 used to tour our asses off, so we were no joke live. The fact that we were barely walking from distance from each other on a stage that wide was a little bit of an issue. And I think compared to Fugazi, who was very vague and very artistic in their presentation of a very obvious, moral agenda, we were very on the nose. And I don't know how well that landed, particularly with the Offspring playing in the middle of us. But no, we went out and we did what we do, and I think we did it very well. We sold 4 dozen shirts before Mario clicked the sticks, which commerce isn't usually the way I judge things, but I would say that there was an openness to what we were doing,
My final...
I love that show. I don't know how it looked from the floor. The LA Times wasn't real... The LA Times essentially called us a generic thrash band, and I said, it's interesting to get paid while you don't listen. Yeah, that's us, man. You got your 411, your DRI, your first MDC record,
Well, I remember reading that in the LA Times, and I remember thinking, you've given this band nothing. You've given this band no attention, none of your time.
They didn't watch. They probably caught a song. They probably caught the opening verse of those homophobic.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And that's the thing that's dangerous about journalism and about music and about commenting on other people's art in general, is that people put the entirety of themselves, at its best, people put the entirety of themselves into their creative projects, and very rarely are they reviewed or given feedback by people who are honoring that effort. Now that said, I'm very harsh on people who don't make the effort and who seem to start bands based on what they think audience appetite might be. That's not singing, that's selling.
Did any of this, that mindset, have anything to do with, you leaving Cry Macho 10 minutes in?
You did that with a great straight face. I wasn't sure that Cry Macho wasn't an animated film. A lot of the line delivery and everything else, the character expression on their faces and everything else reminded me a lot of South Park.
Okay.
Are we done with that shit?